Okay, our third perspective in theory is the behavioral perspective. I hate saying that word. I can never say it confidently. Behavioral. It suggests that human behavior is something that is learned as individuals interact with their environments. So, Pavlov, he is a behavioralist. Think about that social conditioning where he had the dogs, and every time he gave a treat, he would ring the bell. So then they associated the bell with the treat. So anytime a bell rang, the dog would start salivating, even though there was no treat in place. So the dog's behavior was conditioned to expect something. So that is the concept of behavioral perspective. So it explores how humans do something similar with their environment based on their interactions and the outcomes of their interactions. Behavior develops. And so thinking of if I know that every time I'm trying to think of a good example. Of course, I'm blanking on camera. We'll go back to kids again. So if a kid knows that he is going to get a treat every time he does something good, it motivates him and changes his behavior to do something good. So if he knows if I make my bed, I'm going to get a sucker, he is going to make the bed in the anticipation of a sucker because he's been conditioned to know that that activity results in something pleasurable. And so that's that point number one. It's learning when individuals interact with their specific environment. And so you can really look at all human problems as that undesirable behavior that needs to be changed. So it's a very solution-focused perspective, which is really useful for social work. So it believes that all behavior can be defined and changed, and that human behavior is learned through different mechanisms of learning, including association with environmental stimuli, so something that's going on externally, the reinforcement, so that like you get something for the behavior, so kind of like the Pavlov dog, imitation, so copying somebody, and personal expectations and meanings. So this is kind of the visual that if you have this person and you have a structured environment, agency, it doesn't necessarily mean a physical agency. It's kind of like the internal fortitude that they learn through interaction with their environment. So those are different ways that people interact with their environment, and it's going to have an impact on how a person behaves in these different environments based on how they've interacted with them before. So strengths and weaknesses of this perspective is it has strong measurability. It was largely created in a lab facility, so Pavlov and his dogs. And so that really indicates, yes, it's very measurable because it has outcomes, hypothesis, all those fun research and theory components that we talked about earlier. And so it does provide a lot of measurability to give outcomes and results to learn from. It's very consistent with those values of social work where we look at human dignity and worth, that we believe that people can change from their problem that we've identified, and highlighting and utilizing strengths of the individual and that internal agency and fortitude to kind of motivate and change behavior. It's very teachable, so a lot of concept of behavioral perspective can be used if you're working with parents who are trying to learn how to parent difficult children or just don't have education around parenting. A lot of the behavioral concepts get taught to the parents so they're able to utilize them very practically with their children. Some weaknesses of this perspective. It's very interesting because apparently my Ring camera is going off. I am sorry. It's not effective in producing social reform. So it's looking more at the individual piece. It doesn't look at changing behaviors of communities. And so it looks more at changing social conditions, so like fixing that problem versus changing the systemic piece that's causing those conditions to exist and change behavior. So it kind of has the limited and narrow focus when looking at kind of that macro change, and it would be more beneficial if they were able to implement and look at some of the systemic things that are going wrong that need changing versus the individual conditions. Little attention is also given to diversity and how people might respond differently to those same mechanisms of learning. And so a child who hates chocolate might not be motivated by a chocolate reward, versus someone who loves chocolate might really, really want that. So it's not necessarily, doesn't always take into considerations that motivation is the same for everybody. Doesn't also really take into strong consideration diversity of learning. So individuals who might have limited cognition might not respond to stimuli the same. And if you're thinking back to my favorite conflict theory, if one person's in the position of power to reward a behavior, we're still dealing with some of the coercion and power issues that are present. And so that could be looked at if individuals who might be more vulnerable. Receiving the stimuli might be looked at as coercion, or they might feel like they have to do X, Y, or Z to get the end result, even if they don't want to, because they're in a vulnerable position. So how does this benefit and work within the social work profession? It's can be easily used and understood in therapeutic situations, specifically to modify undesirable behavior. So cognitive behavioral therapy, otherwise known as CBT, is a very, very widely used therapy technique and therapy modality within therapeutic settings. And so it has those roots in the behavioral perspective, because you're looking at modifying behavior through different conditionings. And so y'all think about like drug use and minimizing drug behavior, or even self-harming behavior. You're using different conditioning techniques to minimize those risks and maladaptive behaviors. So DBT is the dialectical behavioral therapy. So that's also often used for individuals who have very limited or low ability to manage and tolerate distressing emotions. And so DBT is very focused on individuals who self-harm or engage in negative behavior. So it's a very, very practical and very effective perspective with very specific and different populations, but can also be translated to lots of different populations.